Great. Welcome to the LatinNews Podcast. I'm your host, Richard McCall, here in Bogota, Colombia. I have a very special guest on the line here, Dr. Jacqueline Jimenez Polanco. She's from the Dominican Republic. She is the Associate Professor of Sociology of the Social Sciences Department at the Bronx Community College, the City University of New York, author of many books about the Dominican Republic, but we'll mention a few here. Dominican Politics in the 21st Century, Continuity and Change, Divagaciones II, una antología de mujeres dominicanas lesbianas, bisexuales y queer, that is, an anthology by Dominican, lesbian, bisexual, and queer women. And she has a forthcoming book for this year, 2024, Dominican American Politics, Immigrants, Activists, and Politicians. Welcome on the LatinNews Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Richard, for having me here.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure because we're kind of ending, I would say, series 1 of the LatinNews Podcast, and the Dominican Republic is yet to be covered on this series, the final major country in the region that we haven't dealt with. And it's nice to wind this up with what I believe is a success story. The Dominican Republic, since the 1960s, later mid-1960s, has had a long-standing democratic process and has been working diligently, let's say in terms of the region, in cracking down on official corruption. Perhaps you could put us into context.
Well, basically, the 1960s was a very convoluted experience for Dominicans because after the assassination of Trujillo, the country has a political instability that drove to a civil war in 1965. And that civil war was for the restitution of Juan Bosch's presidency. That was the first democratic government we had in 1962 up to 1962 for only 7 long months. 7 short months, I would have to say. But Dominicans believe in democracy and they wanted democracy to be reestablished. And after the Civil War, they have an election that was not a pure election, so forth, because Joaquin Balaguer, who came into power, was Trujillo's puppet, and he established a semi-authoritarian regime during 12 years of presidency. But in 1978, through the first democratic wave in Latin America and the Caribbean, Dominicans actually went into this democratic process, and they have the first elections at the time that brought up the democratic experience that we are living until today. Very stable democracy. Dominicans have never had any sort of attack or attempt at the destruction of democracy, despite the fact that the beginning in 1978 was a little bit conflictive because there were sectors that didn't want the democratic system to be established. But anyhow, the democracy has been very stable. What I can say is that the Dominican people like democracy. And when I was a young student, that I was already a lawyer, I graduated from law school and decided to go to Spain to pursue my PhD. I basically believe that Dominicans were more democratic than their leaders. So basically, it's the Dominican people that push for the democratic change. And it has been tested throughout all these years. For example, we have the corruption experience that has been a long established system in the Dominican Republic was turned down by Marcha Verde, that was a democratic movement that took place from during 2 years, 2017 and 2018. Through the participation of Dominicans from all walks of life, but particularly young people, millennials and centennials, and representative of women, indigenous, anti-racist, LGBTQIA+ organizations, scholars, journalists, all kind of people that participated in that march that has the country mobilized deeply for 3 years against corruption and impunity. So as you can see, the Marcha Verde was the first mobilization, strong mobilization toward this end. But before that, Dominicans mobilized for the 4% in education through Marcha Amarilla. That was the Yellow March that drove to the increase to 4% of the gross national product for education. And also, there are all the kind of movements in the Dominican Republic that are very active towards the preservation of the natural environment, against anti-Haitian and anti-racist politics, pro LGBTQIA plus, civil rights and full citizenship, women of color, Afro descendant, that are being struggling for the recognition of full citizenship to people of color, and also the women's movement pro abortion and against domestic violence. So as you can see, it's a country that is very much involved in what happens on the daily life. But all these expressions are peaceful expressions. So different from what happened in Chile and what happened in other parts of Latin America. Marcha Verde was a very peaceful one. And also there was the Plaza de la Bandera, that was the flag, that is where we have the flags of different countries of the Dominican Republic. That is a very symbolic center, surrounded by the highest courts, in which young people express their rejection towards corruption during the municipal elections that took place in 2016. So as you can see, it's a very mobilized country, and I have my own theory for my new book. That is that Dominican Americans have acquired very important political position in the United States, despite the fact that many Dominicans that came here in the 60s, they came as tourists. Therefore, they became undocumented, but they took advantage of community organizations where they didn't need a green card or a citizenship to become involved in the community. And through that community involvement, they develop a leadership that called the attention of major parties, particularly the Democratic Party, that actually recognized that Dominicans could gain votes, could gain money to support the campaigns, and were very, very well organized. And that comes from their origins, from a land that has been historically very mobilized. If you go to the Dominican Republic and you take public transportation, people will be all the time talking about political and social issues. And you will get involved into that conversation despite your will, because of the vibrant world that Dominican talks about those sort of issues. So of course, they talk about baseball, that is the national language, but they talk about politics a lot. So it's a very politicized society, very mobilized, which has influenced also the mobilization of Dominicans in the diaspora.
I think that point about the Dominicans in the diaspora, the Dominicans in the United States being so organized, and this, I would say, this fluid relationship then between those in the United States and those in the Dominican Republic, and how important that is. But you say it's a very politicized community, but it's not polarized then.
Well, it's not polarized because traditionally Dominicans believe in the Dominican Republic in the strength of political parties. It is like they terribly believe what we say in democratic theories, that without political parties, there are not stable democracies. And in the Dominican Republic, that people involved both in community activism and in and political parties activism as well.
Mm.
So the engagement is strong and the belief in those parties is strong. So we Dominicans are very critical of their political parties, but at the same time, they're very supportive of party politics. So different from, for example, what happened in Peru with Fujimori that came out of the blue, riding a truck, and all of a sudden became the national leader. These kind of things do not happen in the Dominican Republic because they participate through parties. And traditionally, there have been several political parties that have been going on for many, many years. For example, the PRD, Dominican Revolutionary Party, was founded by Juan Bosch in Cuba in 1931. All right?
Okay.
The PRSC, or PR, Partido Reformista Social Cristiano, was founded by Balaguer before his tenure, his presidency, in the 1960s. And then the PLD, Dominican Liberation Party, was founded in the 1970s by Juan Bosch when he detached himself from the PRD. So what do you have now? The parties that are in existence now are nothing more and nothing less than a renewal or sort of also continuation of previous parties with new names. For example, the current Luis Abinader party is the Modern Revolutionary Party. It came out from a division of the PRD, the PRD, right? So now it's Partido Revolucionario Moderno, Modern Revolutionary Party. That is actually something that has been very typical in the Dominican Republic is the escission of parties. They split out for any sort of dissatisfaction between the leaders, and they form a new party that becomes strong, sometimes as strong as the previous one.
Okay.
For example, Leonel Fernandez party, Fuerza del Pueblo, People's Force, comes from the PLD, the Dominican Party, Partido de la Liberación Dominicana, of which Leonel Fernandez was the leader. Leonel Fernandez, dissatisfaction with Danilo Medina, that was the other leader, drove him to form a new party, the People's Force Party. And in some occasions, like in these cases, because there is a technicality for the formation of new parties. It's not an easy thing to do to get the approval of the electoral board for the formation of new parties. So what they do is that they use the platform of all small parties that were inactive to actually form the new mass parties, right? Okay. The new popular parties. So in actuality, we have the Dominican Revolutionary Party, Dominican Modern Party, Partido Revolucionario Moderno, Modern Dominican Party, Luis Abinader, People's Force, Fuerza del Pueblo, Leonel Fernandez, is still the PLD, but that has been dismantled because it has lost many of his followers to Leonel Fernandez, that was the former leader and was the former president of the Dominican Republic for 12 years. And Reformist Social Party, that used to be Balaguer's party, that is also a very small party. And PRD, Dominican Revolutionary Party, that also got diminished, through the split with the Modern Revolutionary Party. But in essence, there are three parties competing now for the elections. PRM, Abinader, People's Force, Leonel Fernandez, PLD. These are the major parties. In the history of the country, the politics has been split between either two or three parties. And in some cases, a fourth party, but that is very, very weak in terms of voting. So typically 2 or 3 parties. But at the same time, there is the participation of people in many other parties that are small parties and that they go to elections. So don't expect that, as it's happened in the United States, where you have only two strong parties and one small party, that this is the case in the Dominican Republic. There are many other parties.
Mm-hmm.
But in essence, people vote for those that are more consolidated. It is like Dominicans don't like to put their votes to lose.
Okay. Yeah. So back the winning horse. And of course, you have elections coming up in May. How are things panning out now?
Well, there were municipal elections last Sunday, the day before yesterday, right? Last Sunday. And the Abinader party, the Partido Revolucionario Moderno, Modern Revolutionary Party, won 75% of municipalities, of mayoralties.
Huh.
75%, which is a high percentage, right?
Yes.
And Fuerza del Pueblo, People's Force of Leonel Fernandez, only 6%. And I guess the PLD, PLD get around 15 or 16% only. So most of the mayoralties are now controlled by the party that is at the top of the electoral process. You may say, well, what is the influence of gaining the municipal elections? This is very important because this is where people participate and know their representative, right? So the Modern Revolutionary Party is expecting that this will help them to gain the elections. Besides, the president of the Dominican Republic, Luis Abinader, has a very high level of credibility based on his anti-corruption and anti-impunity politics.
Mm-hmm.
Because previous to this period, the PLD, PLD, Dominican Liberation Party, that has been led by Leonel Fernandez and Danilo Medina, had established a cartel politics style in the Dominican Republic, in which the party not only controlled the state and all the major institutions in the state, including the high courts, but also became the main supplier of the state, because the members who were original from working class families became moguls. So very rich business people who were the main suppliers of the state. So they were controlling business. They were controlling government. They actually established a cartel.
Yeah.
And this cartel also applies the method that cartel parties typically apply, that is to avoid the competition through the elimination of the other parties that make competition to them, and also through collusion with those who won through their manipulation of the tribunal court as their allies for the cartel politics that the PLD had established for 20 long years. Right? Because they govern first, they govern for 2 periods, and in total they make 20, first 4 years and then 16 years, all the way long. So the expectations that many people had was that this state cartel party would make it very difficult for the country to recover, because the Dominican people got to the point to believe that being politician was to be a thief, was to be corrupt, and that people who gain a political position were only ready to get advantage of the resources of the states for their own benefits and the benefits of their allies and followers. So Luis Abinader has transformed. And in the history of the Dominican Republic, this is a landmark, has transformed the belief that people had in politicians, because starting with his own example, in which himself and his family, his father was a member of the PRD and also had the Dominican Alliance Party, he was a very respectful man. And Luis Abinader doesn't have anything to do with governmental benefits, with any sort of corruption, or with any sort of corruption activities. And people like that. And because of that, you see that in the municipal elections, people gave their vote to Luis Abinader's party. And because of that, Luis Abinader is actually in a position to gain over 53 and perhaps even more percentage in the election. So Dominicans are ready for have only one round.
Wow.
Because that's how high the credibility and the popularity of Luis Abinader. I give you an example that is very, I would say, very symbolic. While other presidents in the Dominican Republic took advantage of the political power to become rich, to become wealthy, Luis Abinader decided not to receive any payment, any salary for work as a president. And he works 12 to 14 hours a day. He's totally involved in every action of the country and he's very much acclaimed by new voters like centennials and millennials. And all members of society feel comfortable with someone that is not corrupt. So the Dominican Republic, that had been occupying a high position in terms of the most corrupted corruptive countries, of the most corrupt countries, is now occupying a good positions in terms of the lack of impunity and corruption. At least the efforts that the government has been doing, because we have to understand that corruption has been systemic. And it's not that things are going to change all of the sudden. But he took a first step, was to name Miriam Herman Brito, an independent civil servant, an independent judge, as the procurator, as the attorney general of the Dominican Republic. So that was a first important step, because until now, most of the attorney generals have been, subdued to the president's will.
Yeah. School friends, as we had here in Colombia, but let's not go into that. But this is interesting to me because, of course, this success story on anti-corruption and anti-impunity is obviously, these will be major campaign issues once again. As you said, it was systemic, these problems, and I suppose institutionalized, weakening the institutions, the government institutions and the state institutions. But under Luisa Abinader, it's been strengthening then. I mean, these things are happening and producing results for the Dominican people.
Yes. There are several aspects of the Dominican, and I will call them technicalities again, but in the Dominican judiciary system, that makes things a little bit harder. The system established perhaps 1 decade ago, because when I was a lawyer, it didn't exist. The medida de coerción. The medida de coerción, the coercion measure, is a preventive measure that allows the system, the judiciary system, to either keep people in prison or to keep them isolated from activities during a period of time that is a maximum of 2 years. After these 3 years, if the case has not been solved, the person is relieved and the process continues. That actually has discouraged a lot the expectations of the Dominicans, but it's not something that is easy to change because it's embedded in the penal code. We have a codification that is very old. And basically, the medida de coerción has been established to benefit those who have economic power, because they are the ones who can pay very expensive lawyers to be constantly disrupting the progress of the judgment of the suit. So as a result of that, people who were in prison, like the former procurator or attorney general, they were released. They are being judged, but they are at home. And as these people happen to be rich people, they have a good time. They cannot travel, but they still have a life. If you were a poor person, you wouldn't have the chance to get the relief because you wouldn't have the lawyers to actually incident the process. And the Dominican Republic has very good incidentalist lawyers that are trained to do that and that gain a lot of money for doing that for rich people. So that coercion or medida de coerción, is an obstacle for the speed of the process. But we know that happened in all capitalist system. We have the case of Donald Trump in the United States, right? So it's not that the United States can be a very good role model at that level because capitalist societies always try to protect the rich at the expense of the poor. So that kind of measures actually affect negatively the speed of those processes. But persecution is there and it's good and it's effective. On the other side, there is a second obstacle, and it's the resources that the procurator has to conduct these cases because in the procurator in the whole system, because there are so many hundreds and thousands of pages for every case that perhaps there is not enough people and enough time to read all those pages and to get to the conclusions of those processes, right? Because I'm saying it's a systemic corruption. These people were committing corruption for over 20 years. So this is a second obstacle. And third obstacle is that the previous administration made sure that the judges and also the procurators, the fiscales, were prone to their parties. And therefore, there are still judges that are not that pure because they are linked to the PLD, the PLD. And there are at least the attorney general have made sure to clean up the system. But the systemic corruption in the judiciary system made that the Escuela de la Magistratura, that is the paramount institution of for having a good and decent justice, was also corrupted at the time. So it's something that is a step. The government is taking steps, but when is it going to be seen as something with a spectacular result, like having a corrupt politician in prison for, I don't know, 30 years? That is the maximum in the Dominican Republic. We don't know when this will going to happen. But what is happening, and that's for sure, is that the government is taking two steps. Number one, every corrupt person in his government from his own party is fired. First step. And it's not taken back. Second, every corruption committed by people in the current governing party is also persecuted. Right? And the United States helped with taking back their visas so they cannot travel to the United States. And this is something that is in reality important in terms of the corruption, the persecution of corruption and impunity. But systemic changes, systemic impunity take time to be removed.
Of course. But the positive side of this is at least these obstacles are identified, and therefore, a continuity in the politics could help again unwind or unravel some of this a little bit. So I guess, with a heavily politicized citizenship and, of course, people very much involved in local politics, this is very positive. Again, I wanted to move on slightly, though, from this, because obviously corruption permeates so much of all business and politics and the establishment. Um, but again, if we look at the last 20 years, when we think of industry in the Dominican Republic, the real success story as well is tourism. I imagine it's off limits from politicians to get involved. Let the tourism industry continue to generate the big bucks for benefits for the country.
Yes, the Dominican Republic is part of an island, right? It has beautiful scenery, mountains, river, warm weather in the seashores, and we have very cold weather, cool weather in the mountains. So people have a lot of choices to travel to the Dominican Republic. The tourism area has been developed throughout many years, and the current president is also making his big efforts to develop certain areas that were traditionally abandoned by other governments. So, like in the south, Dominican Republic, that have beautiful beaches. So, the tourism industry generates a lot of income to the country because it generates new jobs, generates new investments, and and that is important. But the Dominican Republic is also a country with a high level of agriculture, and that is not well known. Most of the products that Dominicans consume come from their own soil. And this is good. That doesn't happen in other islands around the area in the Caribbean. So this is something very positive. And I travel to the Dominican Republic regularly, and every time I see new growth, new agricultural, new items that are being produced there, and the Dominican Republic doesn't have lack of food, so that's very essential. Tourism, on the other side, is not only the high industry in terms of the traditional touristic areas. There are many places that have very good and very environmental tourist visits and tourist organizations that has been been developed in the country for the last 20 years. Still, tourism is an industry that we have to see with certain care, because when there is a lot of tourists, there is a lot of garbage. There is a lot of contamination. There's a lot of pollution. For example, the last year, Dominicans received 10 million visitors. That is equal to the population of the country. So in 2023, the Dominicans visitors double the amount of the population. Is that good? Well, that's good for in terms of money. I don't know if that is so good in terms of the protection of the natural environment. So I think natural environment is an issue that needs to be taken care of by the government. For example, there is the Punta Catalina coal-fired power plant that creates a lot of pollution. That plant that was built with the hands of corruption and benefited certain groups during the PLD government is something that needs to be solved, because having a coal-fired power plant in the 21st century is something that is not appreciated by the people, is not appreciated by allied governments. So I think the government has to invest more effort in cleaning the natural environment. Unfortunately, there was a minister, Orlando Jorge Mera, very decent, very serious, and devoted minister that was assassinated he was doing a very good job. And because of that, he was killed by someone who was a political ally and supposedly a friend of him.
Mm.
So, and after his assassination, of course, having someone who has so much empathy with the natural environment and who was applying the law correctly, uh, we have a new minister who's very good as well. But I tell you, is something that needs high level of attention from my point of view.
I can understand that indeed. The one of the first points, of course, about being self-sustaining in terms of an agricultural and not importing everything is a very solid base for the Dominican Republic. We do need to wind this down, but I have to finish, obviously, talking about Haiti. Sharing the same island, or Hispaniola, if you want to say, right back from the beginning. How is the Dominican Republic? How are people reacting to what is going on with the gang culture or the gang rule in Haiti at the moment?
Yes, I am a deep fan, a big fan of studying the history of the Dominican Republic. By the way, there is a book chapter that I wrote about Santo Domingo in the 1700s, the sexual gender life of Santo Domingo in the 1700s. That is coming also this year. And I studied Las Casas for several years when I was a research assistant at the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute. I found that actually Taínos call the Dominican Republic home. And Quisqueya, that is the Taíno term, means home because it is mainly flat lines, a lot of valleys.
Mhm.
In the Haitian side, they call it Agiti, that means mountains, and this is where the name Haiti comes from Agiti. At the time, the island was entire, not divided, but the mountains mark a difference between the eastern and the west side of the island. So, eh, I also read that Taínos have a very good relationship with with the immigrants, the slaves that came from Africa during the transatlantic passage that actually started basically in the Hispaniola. That was the name that the Spaniards came to the colonized territory. And they formed communities that rebels against the Spaniards, known as Maroons, los Cimarrones. And Tainos and African melted very well. So the mixture of races, this is to tell you that the mixture of races is very traditional in the Dominican Republic with all immigrants from all around the world that come to the island. So, and we are the result of that. However, as an effect of post-colonization, we have a divided island because the French occupied the Haitian part and the Spaniards that were the owners of the entire islands then decided to sell, to cede. They call it secession, the western part to Haiti, to France. And that's where everything started, particularly the 1697 Peace um, agreement. Those agreements were always signed in Europe, because it was all about European investments and capitalist benefits.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, the island has have this historical confrontation that drove to Dominicans become independent from the Haitians in 1844. But then the Spaniards occupied the Dominican Republic again, and the Dominicans have to have needed to have a second independence from the Spaniards in 1863. So it's a whole story of invasions. The point is that because Haiti became the poorest nation of the Caribbean and Latin America and was abandoned by the French after its independence because it was the first independent Black nation in the world, Haitians have been paying very hard for their independence. And that has conducted to a process of impoverishment impoverishment. It's a systematic poverty that Haiti has been experiencing. So the point is that there are treaties that were signed to maintain the borderlands, the artificial borderlands. But Haitians are very poor. And when you're poor and you have no resources, you cross any border in order for you to survive. And that's what Haitians have been doing. On the other side, the Dominican Republic is not a wealthy nation. It's a nation with a lot of conflicts, with a lot of problems. And one of the main problems that have been corruption has been playing an important role in the trafficking of Haitians from the Haiti side to the Dominican Republic with the involvement of the police department in that traffic. So this is a situation that has been created for a long period of time. There are smugglers that take advantage of the situation of Haitians. To give you an example, the vast majority of Haitian women who are pregnant are treated in Dominican hospitals, and they feel comfortable with that because they don't have those resources in Haiti. So Dominicans in essence, have been very kind to Haitians in terms of the people, the relationship. When you go through the countryside, when you go, as I have done and as I do constantly, there is a good relationship between Haitians and Dominicans, and there are intermarriages between the two people. So the problem is that how can you, as a country that share an island, can help solve the humongous problems that the other side has when the colonizers, the previous colonizers, let's say France, Canada, Spain, the United States, etc., don't do enough efforts to solve the problems of that nation. The Dominican can only do so much. And this is the situation. So instead of expanding the idea of Dominicans being anti-Haitian, which some Dominicans are, and which some Dominican politicians are, we have to understand that this is a minority, particularly consider that these are the extreme right in the Dominican Republic. The Vincho Castillo, Joaquin Balaguer, and all these people that were anti-Haitian. But in essence, Dominicans do not express anti-Haitianism. Otherwise, they would be fighting daily. And this is not the case. Otherwise, Haitians wouldn't be fleeing from Haiti to the Dominican Republic. Because you don't want to leave your home if you're well treated to go to another home where you are bad treated. And the population of Haitians in the Dominican Republic is high. The other issue is how the Dominican government create the mechanisms to establish an immigration system that favor the presence of Haitians in the Dominican Republic with the respect of the human rights of those poor people, because in essence, all have to do with the fact that they are poor. Because rich Haitians have a very good life in the Dominican Republic. Very good life. And they are owners of constructions, of investment in construction, investment in tourism, right? So what can they do? And I'd like to see these wealthy Haitians working with the Dominican government to help to improve the condition of Haitians and to create migratory mechanisms that protect Haitians. Anti-Haitianism was expressed in the Constitutional Tribunal, the Constitutional Court of the Dominican Republic, with that infamous case, sentence or sentencia in which the Dominican Constitutional Tribunal, I think it's the 16813, the sentencia 16813, if I don't have any note in front of me now, I'm just looking at you and using my memory, that I read it the entire sentence. It is infamous. It is horrendous. and I got totally shocked when I read it. I couldn't believe that could have been produced by Dominican judges. So they did. I was told that there were people from other country helping them to build it, but they did. And that infamous decision of the Constitutional Court actually affected the return of many Haitians to Haiti, or even though they have been living there for several decades and have raised roots in the Dominican Republic. That was terrible. And this is something that has marked the trajectory of the Dominican Republic and affected the I don't know, the repatriation of people that has nothing to do with Haiti because they were in the Dominican Republic for such a long time. They have their children there. Yeah, that was during the previous government. That decision was taken under the PLD's presidency and the PLD's judges. So
Well,
this is something
yeah.
that is
Well,
very
yeah. As I said, I mean, plenty to work on, plenty to do in the Dominican Republic. I think this is an ideal place to bring our conversation to a close. And we have really been informed as to what's going on in the Dominican Republic through your interventions on this conversation. And I'd just like to say thank you so much to Dr. Jacqueline Jimenez Polanco, the Associate Professor of Sociology at the Social Sciences Department at the Bronx Community College at the City University of New York. It has been revelatory, really, talking about this, the elections, the work on corruption and impunity, the issues with tourism, and of course the environment, and nothing less than Haiti alongside, and some of the issues in that, I would say, that constitutional sentence, as you said, which obviously is very damaging for Haitians wishing to return to their homeland from the Dominican Republic. So let me take this time to say, if you can check out her books, Dr. Jacqueline Jimenez Polanco, Dominican Politics in the 21st Century, Continuity and Change, Divagaciones II, una antología de mujeres dominicanas, lesbianas, bisexuales y queer, an anthology by Dominican Lesbian, Bisexual and Queer Women, and her forthcoming book, Dominican American Politics, Immigrants, Activists, and Politicians. Dr. Jacqueline Jimenez Polanco, thank you so much for your time on the Latin News Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here, Richard. It has been my pleasure.
An absolute pleasure is mine. And to the listeners of the Latin News Podcast, please, of course, subscribe and share. And we'll be back in another fortnight with further interviews about the region. Thank you and goodbye.